Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. Welcome to Wednesday. Hope you checked in with your star attendance taker. AirPods, both of them removed, not just one, both. Thank you so much for helping your friend there. That was awesome. Welcome to the day. It's been a full week. We are in full flow here at Bay. Lunches have been fabulous, good conversations. Today, we get to hear from a long-term member of the faculty. One of the things I love about working here is that I just learned a lot from a lot of different folks, including individuals who have all sorts of ways of seeing the world from which I can gain insight, I can gain perspective. Every conversation I have with Craig Butts always leads me to a wondering and a possibility, and I'm really pleased to welcome and introduce Craig Butts.
Good morning, everyone. I thought I'd share something I've been thinking about lately, having to do with creativity. So this summer, I was watching a YouTube video about the history of the telegraph, as you do, and one story stuck out to me. So in the 1700s, people were experimenting with electricity, and they didn't have batteries, they hadn't invented AC power. All they had to play with was static electricity. And somebody figured out around 1850 that if you could send a charge through a wire, maybe you could send a message through a wire and communicate. But how to do that wasn't obvious. Like, how do you take a letter and put it in a wire and get it to come out the other end? And it actually took another 20 years before someone kind of came up with a solution. And the obvious, not so obvious at the time, solution was to have one wire for each letter of the alphabet. So 26 wires. And you can see this illustration, some sort of hand-cranked static generator. And you can touch the charge to these nails that are attached to wires that go into the other room. And so first the idea was he took some little strings and some balls of pith, which were kind of like styrofoam, except made out of the inside of the plant stems. And they would deflect slightly when the charge was applied. You kind of like look at that and be like, oh yeah, those are the letters. Not super practical. And it took another 20 years for somebody to figure out a better idea. And this was the idea that really got me. Francesco Cavallo in 1794 decided that he would give 26 people each a wire, and when they got shocked, they would shout out the letter that they'd been assigned. So I heard this horrifying idea and I was delighted. Like that is how long-distance communication began. And obviously not actually a practical way of doing it. And it took him another 10 years to come up with another way of doing it that was less labor-intensive. They put the wires into basically a fish tank of acid, and then they would bubble when the charge was applied, and that was a little bit better. It took another 30 years of experimentation before they settled on Morse code, where they could just use one wire and use a series of dots and dashes, which are a lot like zeros and ones, to send a message. And that eventually evolved into the computerized messaging we have today, like email and texting and everything else. So this wonderful story reminded me, for some reason, of when I was in maybe 4th grade, 9 years old. And my friends and I would hang out at recess in the concrete tube on the playground like these AI-generated children. And we wanted to build a submarine. And we thought, oh, well, Brian's older brother is taking welding classes. He can weld it for us, and we'll sail it in the pond near our house. And so we spent several days planning this submarine and making diagrams. And I remember that we were going to, have jets of bubbles that we'd push on a sliding wall to squeeze the air out the bubbles, out the jets, and we'd have hand-cranked propellers to move it around. But sometime, I would think back on this when I was in high school, and I'd be like, kind of embarrassed, about how juvenile those ideas seemed. Like, that's not how you would make a submarine go. But then, sometime in my 20s, I think, I saw an article about early submarines, and you know what? They were pretty much exactly what we'd imagined. The solutions that seemed accessible to 9-year-olds were exactly what had been feasible during the American Revolution. And actually, as I remember our plan, it looks even more like this early submarine from the Civil War. And you think about it, what powered boats before 1800? Wind, or you could row, right? So like you obviously can't use wind underwater. And so like what you're left with is something like a hand-cranked submarine. There actually was one other way to move boats, a third way. Any thoughts? Horses. They pulled barges down canals with horses. This was the most efficient way to get goods across the land before the 1800s. And if you apply some childlike imagination to the problem, you might think about like, well, how could you put the horse on the boat? Any ideas? Like a treadmill, right? You know what? They did that. There were ferries powered by horses on treadmills. Here's another version. I think that the horse walks in a circle to turn the crank that powers the wheel. So here's the key idea. Adult ideas are not better than little kid ideas. And in fact, adults have the best ideas when they let themselves think like children. And I think the defining characteristic of childhood ideas is that they disregard judgment, whether an idea is good or bad. It's just not what kids think about. So this Venn diagram is based on Peter Thiel's idea about what ideas are worth investing in. And so there are lots of good ideas. For the most part, ideas that are obviously good are already taken. Somebody has already developed them. And there are ideas that seem like bad ideas. And most of those actually are bad ideas. But there's this intersection of ideas that seem like bad ideas that are actually good ideas. And those are great ideas. But it can take a while for great ideas to become great. So case in point, the bicycle. This is not a bicycle, this is a wagon, a very old wagon. But people have been using wheeled vehicles for more than 4,000 years before anybody tried to make a bicycle. And it wasn't that they just needed to like remove two wheels. Like there were two-wheeled carts for all of that 4,000 years, pulled by people or animals. But obviously, if you put, at least before you've seen a bicycle, obviously if you put the wheels in front of each other, that's a bad idea. It's going to fall over. So it was only in 1817 that Baron Karl von Drais gave this idea a try and found out that you actually could coast and balance. And they called this a dandy horse. I guess it's a little bit like a horse and ridden by dandies. But seriously, this is not ready for prime time. And the solutions, how to make this a good invention, weren't obvious. It took a lot of experimentation. This version doesn't have pedals, it has treadles that go up and down. And it took about 67 years for the modern safety bicycle to emerge, which seems like quite a while, but also not that long compared to 4,000 years of wheeled vehicles. And I don't believe that in all of that 4,000 years that there wasn't a single young person who thought, like, what if you put two wheels in front of each other and coasted on it? But it took someone who could look at a seemingly crazy idea and not dismiss it as stupid, and also who had the time and the resources to build it and put the idea into the world and get the wheels rolling. So I want to give you one last example that is not transportation related. A few years ago, IKEA asked kids to submit drawings that they could make into stuffed animals. And you could look at these and be like, yeah, those need some modification. Like, that doesn't look like a real unicorn. Like, how's this going to stand on those skinny legs? But rather than fix them and make them look right, they executed the drawings faithfully. And they ended up with the most wonderful stuffed animals ever, some of which my son had when he was a little kid. And so I want to leave you with this. My hope is that you will listen to your creativity and resist rushing to judgment about your own ideas. Try making dubious ideas a reality, and allow time to reveal which of those ideas that seem bad are actually great. Thank you.